Just as Scarlett leaned into Derek's shoulder, a sharp knock rattled the front door. Derek's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing as he rose to answer it. On the porch stood a man Scarlett never thought she'd see again. Douglas Wright, holding an envelope with her name on it. Scarlett Monroe's heels clicked a bright, staccato rhythm across the Westbrook Country Club's marble floor, each step an announcement, each glance a ceremony. The annual charity gala was at full shimmer, crystal chandeliers trembling with light, champagne pyramids refracting tiny suns, a soft tide of practiced laughter washing over a sea of white tuxedos and whiter smiles. Scarlett moved through it all with the assurance of someone who believed she'd been born to the center of the room. "Darling, divine," Rachel Bennett breathed, air-kissing both cheeks. "Douglas must be counting the minutes until he can whisk you away from your admirers. He knows better than to rush me while I'm networking," Scarlett said, letting her red lips tilt just so. She lived for these angles, of jawline, of conversation, of advantage. The world, after all, was angles and access. Her gaze skimmed the hall and snagged on a shadow in the corner. A black man in a maintenance uniform collecting stray flutes from window ledges, careful and quiet. The cut of his shoulders suggested strength. The deliberate way he moved suggested discipline. His name tag flashed when he turned. Derek. He never intruded, never asked, simply did the work that allowed everyone else to sparkle. "Can you believe they couldn't find better staff?" Rachel murmured, voice dipped in disdain. "That one hasn't stopped staring at the jewelry." "Someone should remind him of his place," Scarlett replied, eyes already drifting to the mayor's table. "It's impossible to find decent help now. My mother says you have to speak firmly or they'll take advantage." The sentence left her mouth so easily it barely registered as a sentence at all. The room accepted it, as rooms like this often do, and carried on. For a heartbeat, Derek's eyes lifted. They met Scarlett's just long enough for her to register something she couldn't name. Not insolence, not submission, something steadier. Dignity, perhaps. The thought arrived and left in the same breath. She turned away, and with that simple movement erased him. Douglas materialized with a hand at the small of her back, tailored, handsome, camera-ready. "The mayor wants to thank you personally," he murmured, and pride bloomed in Scarlett's chest the way it always did when doors opened precisely on cue. She belonged. She had curated her belonging like an art collection. 3 weeks later, the cathedral doors swung wide, and every curated thing shattered. The aisle was a river of white petals. The air glowed with crystal chandeliers trembling with light. Scarlett's gown, ivory silk and lace, so fine she almost believed it weighed nothing, hugged the life she'd built like a promise. She took 1 step, then 2, then 20. A music box figure wound into motion. Rows of faces turned toward her, expectant and approving. Halfway to the altar, the air changed. Murmurs slid down the pews like a draft. Douglas stood at the dais as if cut from marble, still, pale, eyes cold. His hands hung at his sides. He did not reach for hers. "I can't do this," he said. Not a whisper, not a private crack that could be plastered over. A sentence made of stone, placed in the center of the room. Silence detonated, then reassembled into 1,000 frantic pieces. Gasps, someone's stifled cry, the scrape of a pew. Scarlett's smile held, brittle as spun sugar. "Douglas," she tried, the word breaking against her teeth. "I'm in love with someone else," he said, and already he was stepping back. "Cynthia and I fly to Paris tonight." He turned and the side door accepted him, and the hinges closed with a finality that seemed obscene. The priest's book remained open. The quartet faltered and stopped. No photos signs dissolved beneath the chemical hiss of rule-breaking cameras. Scarlett's father stood, then sat.
A woman in the second row covered her mouth too late to smother, "Poor thing." Scarlett realized distantly that she was standing very straight, that her hands were very still, that her world had constricted to the tiny circle of air she was allowed, and even that was borrowed.
She turned. She walked back down the aisle alone. She looked at no one. She was a ship refusing to list, a chandelier refusing to swing. At the door, a security guard stood near the vestibule, broad shoulders, steady gaze. His badge read Derek. For a fraction of an instant, their eyes met again. No pity. Something quieter. She broke the contact and crossed into the wet gray afternoon. Rain took the day as if it had been waiting for its cue. The limousine door yawned open. She entered, and the city blurred across the window. Towers and flags, and the careful sheen of money smearing into smudges. Her phone convulsed with messages. Headlines were already sharpening their knives. She pressed her palms to her dress to keep from shaking it apart. At a red light near the river, the car idled. On impulse, born of shock or rage or the need to make a choice that was hers and hers alone, Scarlett said, "Stop." The driver hesitated. She didn't wait. The door clicked, the rain seized her, and the cold slapped the breath from her lungs. The river was an iron snake, churning under steel skies. She walked to the railing, shoes sliding on the slick concrete, veil snagging in the wind. Her chest was an echo chamber. You are humiliated. You are finished. You are alone. The water promised one clean decision, one elegant exit. No headlines could catch her mid-air. Her hands closed on the rail. She lifted one knee. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miss Monroe." The voice did not lunge. It arrived, calm, low, certain. She twisted, and there he was, Derek, rain flattening his hair, uniform darkening where it clung to his arms and chest. No cathedral, no chandeliers, no gilded edges, just the man she had not seen on the night she was certain everyone had seen her. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, and hated the way her voice trembled. "Your driver flagged security when you bolted," he said simply. "I saw you get out. Thought you might need help." "Help," she laughed, too loudly, rain catching in her teeth. "From you!" He didn't flinch, not offering pity, just saying, "No man is worth what you're about to do." The sentence reached her in the way certain sentences do, a bridge thrown across a gap she hadn't realized she'd been standing at the edge of. She looked down at the river, then up at him, then back at the river. The city around them hissed. Somewhere, a siren nudged the distance. The railing felt colder. The water looked darker. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know enough. I know you're hurting. I know this isn't the end, even if it feels like the whole world has narrowed to this spot." He took a careful step closer, palms open, the way you approach a skittish horse or a terrified child, or a woman who has never learned how to be met with softness. He said, "Come down. Let's get you out of the rain." For the first time since the doors had opened and the music had begun, Scarlett felt the weight of the gown. The pearls at her throat were suddenly a chain. Her mother's voice, the one that policed posture and vocabulary and the exact temperature of acceptable emotion, rose and then receded like a tide. The only sound left was rain on river and the evenness of Derek's breathing, as if he were offering her a rhythm to borrow until she could find her own. She placed her hand in his. It was warm. It should not have surprised her that it was warm. He helped her down from the rail, steadying her when her heels slipped and the ground reached for her too quickly. For an instant, they were closer than either of their lives would have allowed an hour earlier. Her fingers in his, her breath in his collar,
His shoulder a brief human wall against the wet wind. Then space returned. She swallowed hard. "I don't need your pity," she said, softer. "Good," he said, and the corner of his mouth almost moved. "I didn't bring any." They stood like that, a radius of quiet carved out of rain, until her shivering took over. He shrugged off his jacket and settled it across her shoulders. It was too big and smelled faintly of coffee and clean soap and something metallic she couldn't name. He guided her towards the shelter of an overhang where the rain softened to a curtain instead of a punishment. "I'll call your driver, or a car, or, if you want, I can just stay until you decide." The decision waited between them, unadorned and unavoidable. Return to the limousine and the life that had devoured her, or step, just a little, into the unfamiliar space where a stranger had chosen to see her when she felt most invisible. Scarlett lowered her eyes to the collar of the jacket, to the neat stitching along the seam. She had spent her life measuring threads of a different kind: names, donations, access. Here was a simpler stitch, and somehow stronger. "Stay," she whispered, and when she looked up, he nodded once, as if the evening had finally found its true beginning. Outside, the river kept moving, indifferent to chandeliers and headlines and the exact size of a woman's courage. Inside the small circle of dry concrete, Scarlett Monroe stood very still and felt, for the first time in a long time, something sturdy under her feet that was not marble. The night had not changed the fact of her humiliation, or the calculus of gossip, or the loss that waited like a ledger listing all the ways a life can be taken apart. But it had offered her a hand. And if a hand could be offered, perhaps other things could be too. A question, an apology, a different kind of future. Rain softened to drizzle. Sirens faded. The jacket warmed to her skin. "Miss Monroe," Derek said, respectfully, steadily, "what do you need right now?" She opened her mouth, and the answer, new and untrained, rose like breath.
The diner smelled faintly of bacon grease and burnt coffee, a far cry from the lavender-scented air of Scarlett Monroe's usual breakfast haunts. The vinyl booth stuck slightly to her bare wrist each time she shifted her arm, and the fluorescent light above hummed as if impatient for her to leave. But for the first time in weeks, she wasn't entirely alone. Derek Matthews sat across from her, forearms on the table, coffee cooling in his hands. It had been 7 days since the night at the river, and somehow, without either of them naming it, he had become a constant. He called to check on her. He sent a short, no-nonsense text if she didn't answer. Once, he had appeared at her hotel lobby with nothing but an umbrella and a look that dared her to pretend she didn't need it. Now she stirred cream into her mug, the swirl of pale against dark, almost hypnotic. "They're selling my apartment," she said at last. The words felt like splinters on her tongue. "Apparently, my father used it as collateral for a business loan. The bank is foreclosing. I have 3 days to move out." Derek's face didn't change much, but something in his eyes did, a narrowing, a focus. "What will you do?" "I don't know," she admitted, the confession stripping away another layer of pride she couldn't afford to carry anymore. Her so-called friends had vanished like smoke after Douglas's very public rejection. Her family had retreated to Europe to wait out the scandal. Her assets were tangled in legal knots tied by the very man she'd been groomed to marry. "No one will rent to me. My name's toxic right now." "You could stay with me," Derek said, tone neutral, almost casual. Scarlett blinked. "With you? In what I can only assume is not the part of town I'm accustomed to. It's a roof, and it's safe. Your choice." She stared at him. The idea of living under the same roof as this man, a man she would have barely acknowledged 2 weeks ago, was absurd. But the truth was,
She had no other options. And then, as desperation so often does, her mind found a bolder, riskier idea. Marry me. The words left her mouth before she could examine them. Derek's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Excuse me? If we're married, I can access my trust fund without my father's approval, she explained, leaning in now, her voice low but quick. I can pay you, handsomely. It would just be on paper, a marriage of convenience. His gaze didn't flinch, didn't shift away. You understand what you're asking? You, a woman who, until recently, wouldn't even look people like me in the eye, want to be legally bound to me? Scarlett flinched. The truth in his words landed sharper than she'd expected, but she didn't back down. People change, circumstances change them. Not that quickly, he countered, still calm, but he let the word hang in the air between them. If we did this, and I'm not saying I agree, there would have to be conditions. Name them, she said immediately. Respect, he said, voice firm. Complete respect at all times for my home, my family, my friends. You treat them with dignity. His eyes held hers without wavering, and you start examining those beliefs you've never questioned. The old Scarlett would have recoiled at the audacity. The new, desperate Scarlett simply nodded. Agreed. He leaned back, studying her, as if searching for the telltale sign she was lying. At last, he said, Then yes, I'll marry you, Scarlett Monroe. God help us both. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. The justice of the peace barely looked up as they recited the bare minimum of words. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, no photographer to capture a kiss that was never intended to happen. Scarlett wore a fitted blue dress she'd bought the day before, chosen for its efficiency rather than romance. Derek wore a pressed button-down and slacks, the kind of outfit that fit any occasion but belonged to none. 10 minutes after they entered, they stepped back out into the brisk autumn afternoon, legally bound and still strangers in all the ways that mattered. Should we celebrate? Derek asked lightly as they reached his car, a clean but well-worn sedan that Scarlett had eyed with subtle dismay the first time she saw it. This isn't a real marriage, she reminded him, smoothing her skirt before sliding into the passenger seat. It's a business arrangement. The celebration will be when my trust fund clears tomorrow. Right, he said simply, starting the engine. The drive to Derek's house unfolded in silence. Outside her window, the city's skyline gave way to neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks and trees that leaned over narrow streets. Yet when they pulled up to his two-story home, she was surprised. It was modest, yes, but well kept with a small front yard edged in tidy shrubs. Home sweet home, he said, hefting her suitcase onto the porch. It's not much, but it's paid for. Inside, the house was warm in a way she hadn't expected. Not in temperature, but in presence. Simple furniture, clean lines, bookshelves brimming with history and literature, framed photographs of smiling faces, a vintage record player in the corner. It wasn't the gleaming sterility of her penthouse. It was lived in, loved. Your room is upstairs, first door on the right, bathroom shared, kitchen stocked, help yourself to anything. Scarlett hesitated. Thank you, she said stiffly. The words felt strange, directed at someone she would have once considered staff. That evening, they ate dinner at opposite ends of the kitchen table, the clink of cutlery filling the space between them. Scarlett picked at her food. Home-cooked, simply seasoned, but satisfying. Is it not to your liking? He asked, noting her hesitation. It's fine, she said automatically, then paused. Actually, it's good. I'm just not very hungry. You'll adjust. Takes time to get used to new circumstances. I don't plan to adjust, she replied, setting down her fork. This is temporary. Once I secure my financial situation, I'll find my own place. Of course, he said, neutral. But there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name, that made her look away. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Scarlett listened to the creaks and sighs of the house. Below, she could hear Derek moving around, the muffled thump of a drawer closing, the soft scrape of a chair on the floor. She stared at the ceiling, acutely aware of the absurdity of her situation. A month ago, she had been preparing to marry Douglas Wright in a cathedral filled with roses and chandeliers. Now she was married to Derek Matthews, a man her old social circle would barely acknowledge, let alone invite into their homes. And yet, lying there, in the quiet, the color of his skin seemed less significant than the fact that he had been the one to stop her from stepping into the river, the one who'd shown up when no one else had. For the first time, the thought of what might come next didn't feel entirely like something to dread.
3 weeks into their unusual arrangement, Scarlett found herself standing at Derek's kitchen window, mug in hand, watching the world outside his modest home. Across the street, Derek was bent slightly at the waist, speaking to an elderly woman balancing a paper bag of groceries against her hip. She was white, hair tucked under a knit hat, her thin frame almost swallowed by a bulky winter coat. When she shifted the bag, Derek took it without hesitation, carrying it up her short walkway and setting it on her porch. He gave her a respectful nod before turning to walk back across the street. It wasn't the first time Scarlett had seen him do this. In the short time she'd been here, she'd noticed a pattern. Derek fixing a neighbor's fence without being asked, helping a kid pull his bike chain back into place, shoveling snow from Mrs. Patterson's steps before she even woke up. Always without fanfare, always without expecting something in return. It unsettled her. She'd been raised to see kindness as a transaction, something you offered to those who could offer something back. Yet Derek gave it away freely, even to her, despite her coldness at the beginning. When he stepped inside, shaking off the crisp air, Scarlett had 2 steaming mugs ready. "That was Mrs. Patterson?" she asked, sliding one across the counter. "Yes," he said, accepting it with a nod that was more surprised than casual. "Her arthritis is acting up." Scarlett nodded. "You do that often, help people." "When I can," he said with a shrug. "Community matters, even when the community hasn't always been kind to you." The statement landed in a place she didn't want to examine. "Especially then?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Especially then," he replied, sipping his coffee. "Kindness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who you choose to be." She didn't have an answer. A sharp knock at the front door broke the moment. Derek opened it to reveal a young black man in his 20s, tall, wiry, tension written in every line of his face. "Marcus," Derek greeted him, his voice shifting immediately to concern. "What's wrong?" "They arrested Jamal," Marcus blurted, his words tumbling over each other. "He was just waiting for the bus, man. Cops said he matched a description. He's at the station now." Scarlett's fingers tightened around her mug. "Did he call a lawyer?" Derek asked. "Can't afford one," Marcus said. "His mom's freaking out." "I'll handle it," Derek said, already reaching for his jacket. Without thinking, Scarlett spoke. "I know a lawyer, Lawrence Bentley. He owes my family favors." Both men looked at her, clearly surprised. "I could call him," she added, feeling oddly exposed under their stares. "That would help," Derek said. There was a sincerity in his voice that made her look away. She wasn't used to gratitude that wasn't laced with calculation. She dialed the number as Derek and Marcus left for the police station. Lawrence's initial reluctance melted as soon as she reminded him of a favor he owed her father. Connections she'd once used for her own gain now served a different purpose, and that realization sat strangely in her chest. Hours later, Derek returned with Jamal, a boy of maybe 19, along with his tearfully grateful mother. They were still in the narrow hallway when Jamal's mother clasped Scarlett's hands. "Your wife's lawyer friend was a miracle," she told Derek. Then to Scarlett, "God bless you both." "It was nothing," Scarlett murmured, uncomfortable with praise she didn't feel she deserved. She'd made a phone call. Derek had dropped everything and walked into a hostile environment to stand beside a scared kid. Later, when they were alone, Derek's quiet thank you carried more weight than the effusive gratitude from Jamal's mother. "I didn't do it for you," she said, almost offensively. "I know," he replied, and a faint smile curved his lips. "That's why it matters." That night, she lay in bed thinking about his words. For the first time in years, she'd used her privilege to help someone outside her carefully curated world, and instead of draining her, it felt right. A week later, the mail brought a thick cream envelope bearing familiar gold embossing, Rachel Bennett's annual charity luncheon. "You're going?" Derek asked over breakfast, noticing her staring at the invitation. I should, Scarlett said, straightening her shoulders. It's time I stopped hiding. Want me to drive you? You don't have to. I know, he said, meeting her gaze. Sometimes it's easier not to walk into the lion's den alone. The warmth that unfurled in her chest startled her. Thank you, she said softly. The luncheon was held at the same country club where she'd first seen Derek, months ago, invisible in his maintenance uniform. The irony wasn't lost on her as they walked in together, her in a simple but elegant navy dress, him in a tailored suit that fit his shoulders like armor. The hush that followed them was immediate, the air thick with unspoken judgment. Rachel's smile faltered when she saw Derek. "Scarlett, darling," she said, kissing the air beside her cheek while her eyes darted toward him. "We didn't expect you to bring a guest." "My husband," Scarlett corrected, the word still unfamiliar but strangely grounding. "Derek Matthews." Rachel's gaze flitted over him, her smile tightening. "How progressive of you. Do join us." It was like wading through cold water. Conversations died when they approached, only to restart in whispers once they passed. Introductions skipped over Derek entirely. Drink trays seemed to miss his reach. Scarlett felt the disdain radiating toward him more acutely than toward herself. "Scarlett, may I have a word?" Rachel's fingers closed on her arm and guided her toward a corner. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Is this some kind of statement? Or has your downfall truly driven you to this?" Her gaze flicked toward Derek, dismissive. "Using this man as your prop is pathetic, even for you." The old Scarlett would have frozen, searching for some way to reclaim Rachel's approval. But now heat rose in her chest, not for herself, but for Derek. "His name is Derek Matthews," she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach nearby tables. "He's a veteran who served this country while most of the men here were avoiding the draft. He's educated, kind, and has more integrity in his little finger than anyone in this room, including me." Rachel's face flushed. "You've lost your mind." "Maybe," Scarlett said, stepping closer, lowering her voice. "But I've finally found my soul." As she turned away, Scarlett caught sight of Derek watching from across the room. His expression was unreadable. But when he crossed to her and took her hand, the gesture was simple and steady. Together, they walked out, leaving the whispers behind. In the car, silence stretched for a block before Scarlett said, "I'm sorry you had to experience that." "I've experienced worse," Derek replied. "The question is, are you okay?" She thought about it. She just burned one of her last bridges to her old world. And yet, she felt lighter. "Yes," she said, "I actually am."
Winter arrived quietly, blanketing Derek's neighborhood under a layer of soft white. The snow muted the usual city sounds. No car horns, no shouts from the corner store. Just the muffled crunch of boots somewhere down the street and the faint laughter of children playing in the park. Scarlett stood at the bedroom window, fingers curled around a mug of coffee, watching a group of kids roll snow into uneven mounds. They worked together, mismatched gloves and flushed cheeks, their voices rising in bursts of joy. 3 months ago, she would have looked past this scene without a second thought. Now she found herself lingering on it, letting it settle in her chest like something precious. A knock on the doorframe made her turn. Derek leaned there, holding another steaming mug. "Hot chocolate," he said, walking over to hand it to her. "Cold day like this calls for it." She took a sip, blinking at the faint spice under the chocolate. "Cinnamon?" "My mom's secret," he said, his voice softening with memory. "When I was a kid, we'd play outside until we couldn't feel our fingers. She'd have this waiting, always with cinnamon." She smiled faintly, feeling the warmth spread through her palms as much as through her throat. "It's delicious." "I was thinking of heading over to Mrs. Patterson's," he said, glancing toward the snow-covered street. "Her walkway will be a mess. Don't want her risking a fall." "I could help," she said before she thought about it. His brows rose slightly. "You could? I'm not completely useless, you know. Never said you were." A small smile touched his lips. An hour later, Scarlett was bundled into borrowed winter gear, an oversized coat, knitted hat, gloves that mismatched in color but matched in warmth. The shovel felt awkward in her hands, and her breath came in small clouds as she pushed snow aside.
Her muscles ached quickly, but there was something oddly satisfying about the work, something real in the sound of the shovel scraping against the walkway. When they finished, Mrs. Patterson insisted they come in for tea. She poured with careful, arthritic hands, her porcelain cups chipped but clean. "You've got yourself a good one here, Derek," she told him, nodding toward Scarlett. "Different from your usual type, but I can see she's learning." Scarlett might have once bristled at the comment. Now she accepted it for what it was, the truth. That evening, they built a fire in the small fireplace. The flicker of flames painted the room in gold and amber. Scarlett curled up at one end of the couch, Derek at the other, their mugs sending thin tendrils of steam into the air. The space between them didn't feel as wide as it used to. "Tell me about your family. You know everything about my privileged disaster of a life, but I know almost nothing about you." He hesitated, then began. "My mom worked 2 jobs after my dad died. My brother helped raise me. I joined the military to pay for college. Lost friends in combat. Came back, changed." Scarlett listened without interrupting. She noticed the way his voice softened when he spoke about his mother, how it tightened slightly when he mentioned the things he'd lost. There was strength in his words, but also something deeper, an acceptance of hardship that felt foreign to her. "You've overcome so much," she said when he finished. "I've never had to fight for anything in my life." "Everyone's fighting something," he said thoughtfully. "Just different battles." "What am I fighting then?" she asked, almost curious to hear his answer. He met her gaze steadily. "The hardest one, challenging everything you've been taught to believe about yourself and others." The truth of it hit harder than she expected. She leaned slightly toward him. The fire's warmth and his presence drew her closer. His arm slipped around her, cautious but sure. "This wasn't part of our arrangement," she murmured, though there was no protest in her tone. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." Neither moved away. Months passed, and the ice between them melted almost without notice. The trust fund was finally secured, the legal mess with her father resolved. Scarlett could leave whenever she wanted. But one evening over dinner, she found herself staring at him, noticing the way his hands moved when he spoke about the expansion of his small security company, the way confidence sat on him without arrogance. "You're staring," he said, amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I was thinking about leaving," she said abruptly, surprising herself. "I have the money now. I could get my own place." "Is that what you want?" His voice was calm, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Guardedness, maybe. "It was the plan," she said slowly. "A business arrangement, remember?" "I remember." He set his fork down. "Plans change." The air between them tightened, charged with things neither had said out loud. "What if I don't want to leave?" she asked finally. "Then don't," he said simply. But those 2 words carried a weight she felt in her chest. "It's not that simple," she said, standing to pace to the window. "6 months ago, I wouldn't have even spoken to someone like you. I was raised to believe that—" She stopped, ashamed. "That people with my skin color were less," he finished, without judgment. "I know. You weren't exactly subtle about it at first. And now She turned to face him, her voice catching. "Now I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me because it changes everything I thought I knew about myself, about the world." His expression softened. He stood and crossed to her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. His hand cupped her cheek gently. "Change isn't always bad," he said. "It is when you realize you've been wrong your entire life, when you see how you've hurt people without even knowing it, that you've been part of something ugly. The fact that you can see it now, that you feel remorse, that's growth, Scarlett. The woman I met 6 months ago wouldn't have cared. How can you even look at me knowing what I was? Because I see who you're becoming. And that woman is someone I've grown to love." The word hung between them, fragile and powerful. Scarlett's breath caught. "I love you," she said, the words feeling like freedom. "Not because who you are, but because of it. Your strength, your kindness, your patience with me, even when I didn't deserve it." A slow smile spread across his face like sunrise after a long night. Love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. Every day. When his lips met hers, the last of her walls crumbled completely.
Summer's heat settled over the city like a heavy curtain, the kind that clung to your skin and slowed your steps. Scarlett sat at the kitchen table, staring at the embossed card in her hands. The gold lettering was unmistakable, an invitation to her father's 60th birthday gala. It had been nearly a year since they'd last spoken. "You don't have to go," Derek said from the counter, reading her tension the way he always seemed to. "Not after how they treated you." "It's not about them," she replied, tracing the embossed edges with her fingertip. "It's about me, about not hiding anymore." Derek walked over, resting a warm, steady hand over hers. "If you want to go, we'll go, together." The "we" caught her off guard, not because he hadn't said it before, but because now it felt like a statement of fact, not an offer. "They won't make it easy," she warned. "My father's friends, my old circle, they'll be cruel." "I've faced worse," Derek said with a small, almost wry smile, "and so have you now." The Monroe estate looked as polished as she remembered. Sprawling lawns, a long driveway lined with manicured hedges, and the grand ballroom glowing with chandeliers. Stepping into it was like walking into a life she'd shed. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, the same scent from her ill-fated wedding day. Heads turned as they entered, her hand tucked firmly into Derek's arm. Conversations faltered. Eyes tracked them. Sophia White, her mother, was the first to approach, her society smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. "Scarlett, darling," she said, pressing a kiss to her daughter's cheek, "we didn't expect you to bring company." "Mother," Scarlett said clearly, "this is Derek Matthews, my husband." Sophia's smile froze in place, her eyes flicking to the room behind them. "How modern of you. Your father will be surprised." "I imagine he will be," Scarlett said evenly. The evening unfolded like a play where every actor knew their lines, but none of them cared to hide the malice behind them. Former acquaintances approached with sweet poison in their voices. "My dear, we've been so worried. Living in that neighborhood must be educational." "It has been," Scarlett said coolly. "I've learned what real community looks like, what it means to be accepted for who you are, not what you represent." The woman's smile stiffened. "And what you represent now is quite clear to everyone here." "Good," Scarlett said, meeting her gaze without blinking. "I want there to be no confusion about where I stand and who I love." She felt Derek's quiet presence beside her, his steadiness bolstering hers without him needing to say a word. Later, in the dim of her father's study, the confrontation came. Charles Monroe stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, his jaw set like granite. "Have you completely lost your mind?" he demanded as soon as the door clicked shut. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family's reputation?" "I've done nothing to be ashamed of," Scarlett replied, standing tall despite the tremor in her hands. "I married a good man." Charles's gaze slid over Derek, sharp and dismissive. "This isn't about him being a good man, and you know it. It's about appearances, standards. Call it what it is, prejudice. I was raised to believe that people like Derek were less than us. That was wrong, morally wrong, and I won't pretend otherwise." "So you married one of them to make some kind of political statement?" he sneered. "I married him because I love him," Scarlett said simply, reaching for Derek's hand, "and because he loves me. Not my money, not my name, me." Derek, who had been silent until now, spoke in a voice that was calm but carried steel beneath it. "Sir,
I didn't come here to create conflict. I'm here to support your daughter, who has shown more courage and growth in the past year than most people show in a lifetime." Charles looked between them, his scowl faltering just enough to suggest he saw something real, something he hadn't expected. "You really believe that, don't you? Both of you?" "We do," Scarlett said, her voice steady. "And whether you approve or not doesn't change that." A long silence stretched before Charles exhaled slowly. "Your mother and I will need time to adjust to this situation." It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was the first crack in a wall that had stood her entire life. They left the estate together, the summer night warm against their skin. In the car, Scarlett leaned her head against Derek's shoulder. "Thank you for standing with me tonight." "Always," he said, his voice a low rumble she could feel more than hear. "We're in this together." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. 2 years later, the world looked different. The small white house they shared was framed by a garden Scarlett had planted herself, wildflowers spilling over the edges, herbs and neat raised beds Derek had built with his own hands. She knelt in the dirt now, patting the soil around a young basil plant. Her nails were rimmed with earth, her skin sun-warmed. The woman who once measured her worth in diamonds now found joy in coaxing life from the ground. Derek appeared from next door, holding a plate of cookies. "Mrs. Patterson says the tomatoes are sweeter than any she's had before." Scarlett laughed, brushing dirt from her knees. "Garden therapy? Who would have thought I'd find peace with my hands in the dirt?" "You found peace in a lot of unexpected places," Derek said, helping her to her feet. His touch was warm, familiar, a language they'd built together. They carried lemonade to the porch swing, their spot at the end of the day. Children played in the street, a mix of faces and backgrounds that once would have made Scarlett retreat. Now she watched them with quiet wonder. "Do you ever regret it? Taking a chance on someone who had so much to unlearn?" "Never," Derek said without hesitation. "Watching you challenge your beliefs, fight against prejudice you once accepted without question, that's been one of the greatest privileges of my life." She smiled, leaning into him. "I still get it wrong sometimes." "Especially then, because now you see it, and you try to do better. That's all any of us can do." Scarlett's fingers intertwined with his. "I wish everyone could understand what I've learned, that the divisions we create between people are lies, that love is possible across all the boundaries we think matter." "Some will," Derek said, thoughtfully. "Others won't. All we can do is live our truth and hope it touches the hearts that are ready." Twilight deepened, painting the sky in watercolor streaks of pink and gold. Stars began to prick the darkening blue. Scarlett looked out over the life they had built, modest, imperfect, honest, and felt a peace that would have been unimaginable years ago. "I love you," she whispered, the words still carrying weight despite their frequent exchange. "I love you too," Derek replied, certainty in every syllable. They sat in the easy silence of people who had fought their battles together and come out stronger. The world outside might still judge, but here, in the home they had built, love had rewritten every rule. And that, Scarlett thought, was the truest victory of all.